So, hi there, Marco. So this talk here was a challenge, right, from the organizers try to generate some conversation and to check on the state of DevOps. So I took on the challenge. So let's try to answer the question: Is DevOps dead, right, in 2022, right? Actually, DevOps, the beginnings is starting in 2009, so yeah, but I think officially it was around 2012, 13, so 10 years, give or take. So, hi there, I'm Marco. I work as a lead engineer at PMI, more specifically in infrastructure and operations. I have a background before that of a software developer, backend in startups and scale-ups and unicorns and consulting and government, so I did a lot of things and I pissed off a lot of people, so keep that in mind. So also what I'm going to speak here, take it with a grain of salt. It's my experience on a specific time and place. Also, everything I'm going to say here, it's my own words, not my employee or past ones or organizers. It's my mess you're going to have to listen to. So yeah, and don't get offended of the things I've said here. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about, you've probably are doing, or maybe not, and some of these things will make sense to you, or maybe not, so we'll see. So the question is DevOps dead, right? We are here, or I am here trying to understand, to answer that question. And when I had the challenge, I had to think long and hard about it, because I honestly never thought about, like, is it dead, right? Or everyone is hearing like DevOps in the tech news and in magazine. No, people don't read magazines anymore, so never mind that part. But Hacker News and stuff like that, right? And from that you would think, okay, this DevOps is pretty much alive, right? So we'll see. So is DevOps dead? Does it really matter in 2022, like the DevOps? And I'll talk about what the definition of DevOps I'm talking about. And if it's dead, who killed it, right? And even if it's dead, did we learn anything about it? So we'll see. So let's go back a bit in the past. And I'm not going to talk here about the history of DevOps. You've probably read it somewhere. There's books about it and all the mythology, so I'm not going to waste that time. So. But let's go back just a bit in time, in late 2000s, right? And what DevOps was trying to solve for. So IT ruled the world, the enterprise world, still does in some places, right? And if you don't know it, it's like this very slow, complicated set of processes and things that you have to do to manage your IT infrastructure. And it's very complicated, very boring. And if you talk with anyone, nobody really likes it. But for some reason, enterprises loves it. There's also this misalignment of goals, right, between developers and system administrators or operators, right? Developers wanted to deploy faster and faster, so we are at the last mile of what we call Web 2.0, and smartphones were coming into the market. So there's this need to deploy faster, but operations wanted to be stable, secure, all those things, right? So there's this misalignment of goals that was causing friction. And in DevOps, there's this thing called wall of confusion, right? Which is the way that developers and operations interact with each other, which is basically, okay, someone writes code and then how do I deploy this? And just chuck it off to some ops guy, and that's your problem now, man. So figure it out. And there's all these generated this bad culture where people didn't talk with each other. Deployments constantly failed. There was all these issues, and IT was in a bad state. So this was kind of the mentality of the time, right? So work fine in dev, it's an ops problem now. You go figure it out. And so, again, not going to talk about the history of DevOps, but some people around that time started to talk and trying to see how we could collaborate together and how we could interact with each other to make this this goal of deploying faster, to deliver value faster to the market, so new projects and products to serve new customers, new markets. How could we accelerate this? So people from Flickr, consultants, a bunch of other people worked on this, and I'm not going to again talk about all the principles and ways that you might have heard about DevOps, but this is kind of like a summary of what are the values of DevOps, right? So culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. kind of. So if you look online, this is kind of one definition of it, and there's many variations. So this is called the CAMS model, right? So C, A, M, and S, right? But also the calmer one and the calms one. And if you start digging more, you'll find more and more versions of this. So it's worth what it's worth. So now 2022, and where we're at, right? So a lot of things got better after this, right? Tooling got better. We got the cloud, self-service APIs, SaaS, infra as codes, all these tools, monitoring, logging got a lot better, right? We got a lot better at running software at scale, right? And also the processes of how we run this software, we deploy it, also got a lot better. And we even know how to measure the outcomes of these methodologies by applying a lot of this. So now we have the DORA metrics and SLIs and SLOs and the REDs for monitoring the use one and the defining OKRs and all that stuff that kind of try to benchmark somehow and have a degree of, let's call it, of what we are trying to achieve. So by what metrics will we measure the outcomes of these things we are doing? So yeah, we got containers, right? Docker and all that stuff, huge innovation in terms of software and packaging. But is this what DevOps was trying to solve when we saw this on the previous slides? It kind of did and it kind of didn't. So is it mission accomplished? Not really, right? So you probably know a lot of companies that are using these tools and these practices, but they're still failing, right? They're still failing to deploy into production. Stuff is constantly on fire. Developers don't talk with operations. But instead now of chucking over the wall, we use Teams or Slack or stuff like that, right? So it's not kind of collaboration, it's kind of working by attrition via chat ops or whatever. So again, not entirely, right? And I know you probably know this this movie, right? The Matrix. And there's this big scene where Morpheus is explaining to Neo like how the machines won, and they got this fake reality where everyone goes through the motions, but it's not exactly the reality that people that live in the Matrix think it is, right? So it's kind of like this. It says this expression: "Welcome to the desert of the real," right? And in DevOps, it's kind of this moment that we are at, right? Where we hear about DevOps and the culture and the practices, but nobody really cares about that crap, right? It's like, yeah, I have my containers and my Kubernetes and my CI/CD, but yeah, that's basically it, right? Nobody cares about the culture, the sharing, and that gets basically eliminated from the conversation. So we are in this state of the world which I call cargo culting DevOps, right? And I'll go through some of the things that we are doing that we call DevOps, but they are actually not. And so one of the things that we do in cargo cult DevOps is this thing, is DevOps engineer, right? Which is basically just like a sysadmin, right? But now you do a lot more shit, like a DevOps engineer, it now does what system administrators used to do, and network engineers, and database administrators, and release engineers. But what's the real difference between a DevOps engineer and a sysadmin? It's basically like he learned like to write hello world in Python, and then like, ooh, more 50K more a year, right? Now you're DevOps. And in SRE, it's basically the same shit, but instead of Python, he learned Go, so yeah. So and then you hear like hiring managers like, oh, yeah, so I can find these DevOps people, right? They're really expensive and rare, right? And like, sure, man, but this is like your job role description that you put online, right? There's all this crap here, right? Like, you need to know this, and this is not only the only thing, right? Then you see like there's all the AWS missing and all the programming languages that you need to know, so that's why you cannot find any people. So another thing that we do is this kind of theme structure. And now we have team topologies if you've read the book, and there's a lot of good information how to structure your teams and compose them, but we still do a lot of these things. So how many of you work in kind of like the DevOps team? Like show of hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's pretty good, right? 4. So I asked this a few times in the past, and like half of the people would raise their hand. You know, this is like a silo, right? It's just moving from sysadmins and devs to sysadmins or DevOps engineers and devs, right? So it doesn't really change anything. And then you have this kind of new version of this, which is the platform teams, which is a good solution for a certain amount of scale, but at the end of the day, it can still devolve into the first one. Right? It's like shared services team, that's not a platform. Like if I give you GitHub and there's I don't know, Jenkins, and there's I don't know, some other tools, security tools, and here's a bag of tools, like you fix it, like you figure out how you integrate all this shit. Like that's not a platform. Or the cloud abstraction layer, which is basically when you grab Kubernetes, you put a lot of shit on top of it to control AWS, so it's like AWS on top of Kubernetes on top of AWS, which is like, right? And so don't do that, right? Because come next year, AWS will just basically launch something version better of that and just make you irrelevant, so why bother? And then this is the top one, which is, there's now this thing where there's a dev team, and then there's the DevOps team, and there's a platform team, but the platform team doesn't own the infrastructure. That responsibility is the infra team. So it looks like all these cycles, right? Like this train of crap where code moves from one step onto another, basically via coercion and nagging people. And now my platform is broken. Whose responsibility is it? Like infra people or the DevOps people that wrote the CI/CD pipelines? I don't know. And this is probably the worst one, which is we are cargo culting all the tools, basically. Like this completely steals the oxygen from the room when we want to talk about other things than toolings and processes, right? The culture, how we talk with each other, how we work together, how we share, how we learn. Nobody gives a crap. It's like, I want my Kubernetes, and I want my pods, and my CRDs, and all that crap, right? That nobody really, it's just cargo culting, right? You go to a conference, and there's a bunch of guys from Google saying, yeah, you should use CRDs for whatever the shit, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna use that. And then you build this just gigantic pile of things on top of things that serves no purpose, right? But if you ask, do you talk with devs, or do devs talk with you? No. Devs are smelly and they talk about NPM all the time, and yeah, I don't care about that, so I'm gonna sit in my corners. And on these things, like, context is king, right? Just because there's people using Kubernetes or other tools doesn't make it like the right tool for you in your context, right? I went to KubeCon this year. It's like all the talks is I'm from Unicorn, whatever, and I'm scaling like 50,000 pods a second. I don't have those problems. I don't care about that. What I want to learn is me, the tiny company or huge corporate, gigantic company, how do I deploy my stuff in production securely, fast, without having a lot of maintenance and then burden and maintaining all that crap, right? So again, you're not Google, you're not Apple, you're not Netflix, right? You don't even have the budget or the engineering or the culture, so why just keep like imitating all these companies? Just figure out what you really need, apply that, and just basically live a better life. And it's $1 billion industry. I know that people need to get paid and we need to sponsor open source and all that crap, but I think we are solving a lot of these problems that we created ourselves, right? So we wanted to deploy stuff with, blue-green deployments and stateful sets and whatever, right? Like the solution, like Kubernetes. And I'm not riffing here on top of Kubernetes or what it does or all that, right? It's a good technology for a lot of things, but Kubernetes is like what happens when you ask an SRE to justify his fat salary. He's gonna build that crap full of like all these terms and complexity and leaky abstractions that it's cool at a certain scale, but doesn't serve any of us, right? Just use, I don't know, SaaS or serverless or whatever. It's gonna make your life easier. You're gonna sleep better. So everyone is like, on companies like, oh, Kubernetes, I've heard about this. Is this cool? And oh, is this DevOps? No, man, you're just making it hard to have different conversations about more important things. I'm gonna waste a lot of time here, but it's kind of the same for processes like the DORA metrics. Everyone is talking about it, and I like the study and the conclusions. I'm not just really sure that people are reading the message exactly as it is, right? Like, because company X does this, then if I do this, I'm also successful. It's like, yeah, kind of right. It's not really that, but it gives good hints that you probably might be more successful, right? But even if you are a high-performance team, like it says in the book, in the study, it's like, are you still building the right thing, right? Just because you do like 1,000 deploys a day, if you're building crap, you're delivering crap. So just 1,000 times a day. So anyway, and I think you're losing this is measuring and be data informed, all that the DevOps culture brought to us. It's a lot of things we're not measuring, like the satisfaction of the people that we work with, or our hiring pipeline, or our onboarding processes, and open and rework PRs. A lot of this stuff actually improves satisfaction of people, right? Coming to work and like, I have to review like this 3,000 line PR for the 5th time. It's like, why? Or I'm trying to onboard people into my company and I start with 80 people and I end up like hiring 0. And like, why? Nobody knows, right? It's like, oh, it's the market, it's too hot, like developers, the salaries are too high. Yeah, sure. And then I think this is the most important part, which is the culture part. We are failing a lot on our culture, right? Even with all the tools and the cool stuff, we are failing on a lot of this, right? A lot of companies have these cool tools and fancy, and they say, come to interview with us and all that, but the culture there it's miserable, right? It's like this top-down approach, or there's a lot of things, right? And just because you're using the tools doesn't mean you're gonna get the same culture, right? I think it's the other way around. So developers and everyone complains, right? I don't like the right documentation. But then you pull some open source library from the internet, it's like, shit, this doesn't have any documentation, I can't use this. So documentation is important, right? It's context setting, right? It's informing people of your past decisions, right? It's giving context to why this was built and the way it was built and the time it was built. So use that, use RFCs and decision logs and all that stuff. It's really useful. And I work in the teams that use these things, and it's really great that you go back in time and can reevaluate your decisions and adjust, right? This used to work, now it doesn't, so let's readjust. And also not learning from past mistakes, right? Like every time there's an outage, an SRE loses its wings, right? It's just, service is down again, so who's to blame? Well, that guy, yeah, so you're out of here. And then you're gonna spend like 200K trying to hire another person, right? It's why? Just use that as a learning experience, right? It failed, what process can we put into place? Or how can we teach people so this doesn't kind of happen again, right? So one of the worst things is you give people all the tools and all the budgets and all that, but then you say, you have no power outside of this, right? If you detect there's something that can be optimized, not just in like where you work, but outside of it that influences your work, nobody will let you do anything, right? Like the manager's like, nah, that's above your pay grade. So why spend a lot of time and money with training these highly specialized people like you, and then just treat them like children, right? It's, oh, here's your playground, here's your Kubernetes, go play, shut up. Why? So you probably heard about Daniel Pink and mastery, autonomy, and purpose, the 3 things that drive people to improve, to come to work happy and all that. It's still true, right? It's invest on these things, right? Give people space to learn and to improve themselves and to actually have ownership of the things they work with. And yeah, that's the last 2 lines is kind of the same approach, just from a different perspective, which is, you spend all these money on these technologies, but if someone wants to learn like a new technology, needs some resources, and you want to expense $30, like, nah, that's too expensive. You cannot do that. Oh, but we need to spend like 20K in a Jira plugin for the manager. Here you go, it's 50K. So what's my point? There's no silver bullet, right? You probably heard the expression, It comes from the 70s, from this book, like The Mythical Man Month, which you should read. It's a good book. And there's nothing that's going to save us, right? There's no tool or process that can fix bad cultures. If the place where you work at is crappy, nobody wants to listen to you, by putting in infrastructure as code and CI/CDs and all that, you're not going to fix it. So I think it's Martin Fowler said, you can either change your company or change company. So it still holds true, right? If you spend a long time grinding on this, you cannot fix it. Just go find someplace else to work with. It's better for your health. I know if there's a manager here, it's like, this guy. So the future. What's the solution for all of this, right? And I have some inkling of an idea, right? But I don't think there's an easy fix. And I think we need to start to first, let's talk about this. Like why does the things that are on the DevOps handbook and all this literature, they work for this kind of company, but for if you're like a small developer, I don't know, marketing company that has developers or giant corporation, a lot of those things are impractical to apply to these companies, right? You know, they cost a lot of money, right? Oh, let's build a platform. So it's like 50,000 per month for AWS, then like 5 guys, like 75K each. And you start like crunching the numbers, like, oh, platform is gonna cost me $1 million a year. Like, small company is not gonna do that, right? So we need to talk about this and that the context is important and not all of the things that we see in the internet and come on these books are practical to apply to all companies. So we need to remind ourselves this, right? And a lot of these conferences are just like the places for the money grabbers, right? To sell tools and all of that stuff. We need conferences where it's like the small companies that try to implement DevOps and fail. That's the ones I want to listen to, right? How you try to implement DevOps and you completely fail, not like, well, I had like $1 million to spend on CI/CD and yeah, I nailed it. It was really cool. I just bought all these tools and these expensive developers. Yeah, sure, but it doesn't work for a lot of us, right? I don't have that kind of money. I wish I did. So again, context is king. Keep these things in mind, right? Measure things, figure out what works for your situation. Don't cargo code stuff. And if you have to learn like the stuff that I think is really important, well, like context is king and, oh, sorry. Let's talk about this, and context is king. Like I think the most important thing is feedback, right? Is try some hypotheses, will this work for me? Test it, okay, adjust, try again, right? And do this small iterations instead of like adopting all the stuff that comes on these books and all that, and then failing, basically. So why go on these journeys that you know is gonna fail if there's like this tried and tested thing for centuries now that allows us to infer and to learn more how to solve problems, right? So try this thing, I heard it's cool. And so the question, is DevOps dead? I don't think so. The values are still around and we still get the books and people still talk about this. And I'm talking about it here, right? But so the answer I think is no. But I think that it needs to evolve, right? We need to start to separate these conversations and say the things that work for these people might not work for these people. So let's figure out how we can help these people, but still use these tools and these automations and this mindset of learning and sharing. So that's basically it. That's my conclusion of the question: is DevOps dead? It's not, but it needs to grow up. So thank you very much. That was my talk.
We understand that tools and our user needs to evolve, but do the original principles of DevOps need to evolve as well? Are we just using the principles wrong?
I think some of them do, right? So in terms of the tools, the automation part, a lot of it's happened in the last 10 years, right? Nobody could have, we could have foreseen things like serverless, right? Which is gonna put some of us in some context out of a job. Just just keep that in mind. That guy, I think, is going to probably talk about that. I'm not sure he's going to come to the same conclusion, but we'll see. But I think the things that the DevOps principles talk about, I think they are kind of immutable also, like learning and sharing and collaborating. If you grab a management book that has nothing to do about DevOps or IT, right? It says the same things, right? The most productive companies, the companies that achieve their results better, are companies that have a good culture where people sit down, discuss, talk, iterate in small things. And this comes agile. I didn't mention this, but you all know this. That's DevOps comes from the agile principles. It's just a continuation, right? We tried to, like 20 or 30 years ago, fix the part from, okay, how we go from what we want to build and deliver something to the client, the customer, right? And how we interact with business to determine how we better build things. Now we're just looking at the second part, which is, okay, how do we go from now we're developing things, how do we put that into the hands of the people that need it? So I think those principles are still immutable, and they are, or not immutable, but they are still true and still hold the things that they're set out to fix. So it can evolve and we can add more things, and more stuff has been added, but honestly, I think that because very few people are still using them, before we think, should this evolve? I think we need still to practice them more first, and then think about what's the next step based on now that we all have this approach to doing software development, how we can grow even more and improve even more. So that's my opinion on that.
You mentioned a lot of times about interactions between developers, ops guys, developers. I even saw a client depicted in the slides. Question: how do you see the growing popularity of remote work affecting those?
It's a challenge, right? It's something that you could do before and sit with someone right in the next room, or it's just right in front of him and having a conversation. Now it's a lot harder, right? You have to basically nag someone that has already his calendar full of stuff, right? And trying to find a spot can we talk about this? Can we improve? And all things, I think documentation is helpful for that. So we can kind of start working on these things asynchronously. A lot of these answers that we sometimes have, that collaboration, how we do things, how the process and the details of all these things, they can be written down, right? And instead of me constantly nagging everyone, I can just go and read it, right? So it's a living documentation of the evolution of what we're trying to work on. And being remote, as you know, it's still a challenge on the interactions. Not just having that water cooler kind of discussions where a lot of great ideas come from, right? So you're not talking about work, but those discussions end up influencing how you work with people. It's a challenge, right? So the way you kind of fix that is,
Going back to the office?
Not going back to the office, but trying to have more team building things, making space for people, not just talk about work constantly, incentivize people to share knowledge about other things, talks and all that. And I think we'll see a kind of kickback effect or this kind of feedback from remote work in a few years, right? Where we all now, mostly of us, are now working remotely. A lot of people will kind of fight against that and not want to do it because it's really hard, right? But we're still at the end of COVID, kind of, and we still don't have a lot of data how this is going to work. So I don't have any answers for that, but there's some small things that I think can help.
Thank you.
Who wants this mic?
You can just use it to offend me if you want, and say you're wrong or something like that.
I don't have a question. I have more discussion to the table, not only for you but for all of us. At the beginning, you mentioned the silos, the evolution and the previous silos and the nowadays silos of the DevOps and DevSecOps and whatever created. I've been on several companies and I still see those silos. do you guys overall think that there's a best practice for these teams, so the platform teams and the infra teams, or is it that so difficult to, from company to company, from business to business, mitigate those silos? Is it normal? Is it a day life problem because it's difficult to resolve?
I think it's kind of, to answer your question, it's kind of like you see in small companies. If you work in a startup, like there's people that do kind of a bit of everything, right? So all those people sit together and they work together because I'm doing ops and that person is doing dev. And we kind of, like also doing dev and he's doing op, everyone does everything, right? But as companies grow and you start to see specialization inside companies, those silos naturally occur, right? There's people are not experts at anything or everything. They cannot be, right. There's not so much time in your life to learn new things. So we start to see those silos emerging. And there's the infra people and there's the platform people. And honestly, I don't think there's a good solution for that, right? Even if you go again back to the management literature and all that, it's still hard to fix, right? And you've probably seen that drawing online about Microsoft, where there's like how Microsoft is structured internally, and everyone like pointing guns inside to each other, right? And it's kind of like that in a lot of companies, right? So there's some kind of companies that do this better, and they try this, like for example Netflix, right? Where there's these people that kind of help with the infra and ops, and they create this kind of platform. But the developers are still responsible for a lot of stuff in production and are autonomous, right? But those people are really expensive, right? They are hard to find, so you cannot have like these super developers that can do all these things. So you still kind of have these silos, but I think the lesson is we still need to talk more, right? We need to talk more and understand each other, even if we're working on different departments. And this is harder to do than say, right? Of course, but I don't think there's like a super easy fix for this, or because again, there's no silver bullet for any of this. It's dependent on the context and the place you work and the type of people that you work with, in what country, in what language. Like even language barriers can like start to create those silos. Like the people that live in this country only talk with people in this country, and then the people in this country only talk with the people in this country, and they still work on the same department. So all these things influence this thing. And it's really hard to fix, so I don't have an easy solution for that.
Yes, that's my problem. 10, 12, 15 years later, DevOps can't answer or can't solve that thing.
Yeah, it's true. And but we are a bit more informed, right? These things we didn't used not to study really well and measure these things and the outcomes of these things happening. Now we have a lot more information. We can look into the data and trying to find some correlation or justification for these things and act upon it, right? 20 years ago, it was like, it's impossible. It's like, that guy's infra, I'm dev, I hate him, he hates me, stuff in production is gonna be on fire. That's just life, sorry. And now it's a lot better, so.
So the solution is no silos, everyone is a DevOps.
No, but there needs to be an overlap, right? In a lot of the automation in serverless, and kind of reduce that cognitive complexity, right? You don't need to know as much as some specific points and things in technology, right? If you like see a lot of job roles now, it used to, like 5 years ago, it's like, you need to know Linux and how to use IP tables and S-trace to debug your stuff. And it's like, do you know like how to deploy a Lambda? Yeah, sure, that's work. So nobody really pays attention to that anymore, right? It's still important, especially if you are the person building the infrastructure for Lambda, right? But in day-to-day life, it's starting to be less needed. I don't want to say less important, but still less needed, right? So those tools and the processes can help somewhat, but they're not going to fix this forever or for good.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.